saying here is that they haven't gone far enough. This government needs to have some balls and begin to deal with the problem that we have in the Rainbow Pride community.
Stay in your lane. You know, like I say, we don't come to your church to protest. Don't bother coming out of yours.
Protests, the emotion, the rhetoric, it all sounds eerily familiar.
Do not vote to legalise sodomy in this country, then you know what to do to those members of Parliament next election.
These are the ones who are the perverts, not the gay and lesbian community.
That's a protest from the mid-80s where National MP Norman Jones spoke out against law reform to decriminalise homosexuality. Nearly 50 years later, Brian Tamaki and his Destiny Church are revisiting the same arguments.
I was so disgusted, when I heard it, and I just thought, my God, it feels like we're going back in time.
Children terrified by the screaming and shouting and shoving and punching.
It just hurts.
There is a difference between freedom of speech and hate speech.
For young people struggling with their sexuality, thinking about suicide, it's ugly stuff and it's dangerous.
Kia ora, I'm Davina Zimmer, and today on The Detail, the past, present and future of Aotearoa's rainbow community.
I was reflecting yesterday, I was like, I'm in such a different space, from when I last talked about my gay journey.
It's taken Josiah Pasakale a decade to accept his sexuality, and in today's episode he shares why it took that long. We start right at the beginning, where Josiah was the youngest of three with a Tukaloan father and a Fijian Chinese mother. He grew up in Lower Hutt, in a household that valued church and God, and a culture that didn't acknowledge or accept being gay.
So the thing in the Pacific language is that there's no word for gay.
Oh, really?
So you have Whawhawhine, that's has a cultural place within the village. So that's a male performing duties of a female. And so they normally help mother out at the home, and they often have feminine qualities. They are still recognised as males. What I was thinking in terms of my sexuality did not really fit within the Whawhawhine model.
Josiah wanted to talk about his feelings, but he didn't know how to approach it because, as he told me, being gay was wrong.
Didn't help that I went to an all-boys school. So I kind of finished high school quite, depressed because I had no idea what was going on with my feelings and my sexuality. And it was actually around that time that I found church and I found God through this church. And, I got heavily involved in the Bible, church, serving God. I really believed that my homosexuality was something that could be healed. I really believed that my gayness was some type of sickness, really, or sin, and that, all I had to do was love God more, pray to God more, ask Him to heal whatever traumas I had in the past. And I think that's also part of the reason why I was so into it, because my sexuality was something that I did not want. I didn't want to be attracted to men. I really wanted a wife and kids. I wanted to be like my friends that were, attracted to women and getting married. I really thought that God would do that for me. So that's when, I did something with another guy during Bible college. I myself was very devastated and broken because I had thought, oh no, I've committed the worst thing ever. I'm going to hell. I'm broken. I'm not supposed to be here.
Those thoughts that you're going to go to hell, where did those thoughts come from? Was that because the whole idea of being gay in your culture was wrong? Was that something that was deeply ingrained in you? Or was that a mindset that kind of came later when you became more involved with the church?
Yeah, definitely the later part. The church leaders were quite vocal. I think same-sex marriage legislation was also during the time that I was heavily involved in church.
Legislation which would pave the way for same-sex couples to get married is set to pass its first reading when it comes before Parliament. A straw poll taken by Radio New Zealand indicates there's enough support to get the marriage amendment bill sent to a select committee.
I think there was a sermon that he preached, the pastor, and he said, if you are gay, you're going to go to hell. And so there was a lot of fear during that time that even though the government was trying to pass, this legislation, my church at the time was really using, the fear of God as a tool, as a weapon to say that we need to fight against this. I remember when they sent out the petition that I actually at the time put my name on the petition against the marriage equality bill because of that fear, because I wasn't going to be a part of that. It's really interesting to see myself now versus the person that was in the church and really being manipulated, I guess, to follow the leader's rhetoric.
It's because of this rhetoric that 26-year-old Josiah decided to start conversion therapy. Had he been exposed to healthy examples of being gay, he says his decision and his whole life would have been very different.
When I was in my teenage years, in my 20s, if only I just had really good role models of being gay, I wouldn't have dreaded the acceptance of a faith.
Josiah has since left the church, but retains his faith.
Yeah, I went through a lot in my 20s trying to find acceptance in myself. And it could have all been solved if I just had healthy examples of being gay. None of the bad stuff would have ever happened.
As an openly gay man, do you feel safe in New Zealand?
I'd say I feel safe if I don't attract attention. I think in the past, I used to do quite a lot of things in the public eye. I never really got bad attention from those things, but I do see that life is easier for me if I just, go to work, go to the gym, do my own thing, don't walk down a street waving a rainbow flag. So in that sense, I do feel safe, but in terms of our non-binary folk, our transgender folk, drag queens walking down busy streets in the cities. I don't know if they would say the same.
The country's first openly gay MP says the messaging from the group that disrupted a children's event at Auckland's Te Atatu Library on Saturday is dangerous for young people.
I think they've really missed the mark. I think that their protest is years behind the current conversation. I think that the rainbow community is past that. They want to live their lives. And I think that Destiny Church is being recognised more as a cult now, and that they don't actually represent all churches, all of Christianity. And then if you actually just look at their history, they've always protested different things of relevance just to try to get attention. So I'd say that the New Zealand public recognise that Destiny Church doesn't represent them.
New Zealand's moves to give rainbow individuals equal rights are all relatively recent. The first law change in the mid-80s was decriminalising intimate relationships between gay men. And while Josiah thinks New Zealand has been progressive with legislative change since then, he says our social culture for rainbow individuals is quite young compared to other places like Toronto.
The culture on that side of the world has had a lot longer to mature, where it was actually quite common to see gay couples together for over 20, 30 years, that they had been through the AIDS pandemic together. So the mindset of thinking about gay culture wasn't necessarily around legislation. It was around lived stories of different gay men that had now been together, decades and were settling down and living their lives. And I think that New Zealand doesn't quite have that yet. It doesn't have those stories of those generations, positive role models. Or we probably do, but there's not a lot of them.
When you spoke to me on the phone yesterday, you mentioned how queer culture in New Zealand still being quite a night culture?
Yeah, I do think that there is quite a big night culture in New Zealand, and that's probably what people are used to. They're used to the rainbow bars being, in a basement, in a room that no one can see, behind closed doors. And I think New Zealand has, grown up with that type of culture, but now it's actually trying to see the daylight and be seen. But I still think that has a way to go in terms of the acceptance of, the public, of what that looks like. Is that a rainbow crossing, or is it a sports group? Like, these are examples of what a day rainbow culture could look like. But I think at the moment it's really based around like the nightlife.
Do you think that we'll get to a point in society where everything is equal, not just in legislation, but in everyday life?
In terms of everything is equal, I think that's different for each community. So I'd say that, the church, the Christian community, I think people like Disney Church, for example, would not find the same equality, as comparable to, the rainbow community. Like, it might actually offend them, or it will offend them that, same-sex couples can raise children. And then you have parts of the rainbow community that are marginalized. So, a big portion of the rainbow community is gay men and lesbians. But then, like, other parts of it are like non-binary or trans, which, are more minority within those groups. And so they might see equality very differently. I think the best way to actually grow, a common sense of equality is to grow our communities. So, for example, like having more trans communities, having more non-binary communities, lesbian and gay communities, because I really just think like within community, that's actually where people find acceptance. They find healthy role models. Again, like, I believe at the end of the day, like, people just want to live their lives and grow up and have good stories. And I think that they will find that within their own community.
I used to pop across to Australia. Now, if I wanted to go to a gay pub, the first gay pubs were downstairs and you had to have a pass to get through.
Joan Bellingham says many things that are socially acceptable now weren't in the 70s. Being gay was one of them, despite the growing momentum for legal equality. That didn't stop Joan from being open about her sexuality.
I knew I was gay at quite a young age, and I was quite open about my sexuality when I was training to be a nurse, which was a mistake. And I got picked on by the tutors and the staff at Burwood Hospital, and consequently got put into Princess Margaret Hospital.
Joan was around 18 when she was first admitted for what doctors thought was a neurotic personality disorder. She never felt like she was given a choice, and nowadays strongly believes what happened to her qualifies as torture. But back then, you didn't question authority.
In those days, whatever the doctor said must have been right. So even though, my parents loved me dearly, Mum and Dad were told that I had a problem and that it was going to be solved by going to hospital. So obviously, they must have agreed to it. They had no idea what was going to happen.
When you got there, what did happen?
Well, I became friends with one of the doctors who later left because she couldn't stand seeing what was happening to me. But apparently I went in a bright, young, bubbly girl. 12 years later, after, many admittance and discharges, I was like a pale zombie who didn't have a voice, didn't have opinion, didn't have a memory, no self-esteem. I came out a very frightened, sick young person, really.
In an effort to get justice for the treatment she received, Joan gave evidence at the Royal Commission of Inquiry into Abuse in Care. The following recording is from that evidence.
The amount of medication was astounding. They never explained what it was or what it was for. They also never talked about the side effects. I was just told to take it. They also performed electroconvulsive therapy on me. I believe this was over 200 times during the course of the 12 years. They would give me a muscle relaxant to paralyse me. It felt like razor blades going through my body. Perhaps the most damaging effect it has had on me is my loss of memory. I can recall the doctor who treated me. I would see him once or twice a week. He would ask me all sorts of questions about being a lesbian. He would ask me questions like, how many times a week do you have sex with your partner? And what is it like? I would become very scared and not want to be left in the room alone with him.
Joan was also a target in her community because of her sexuality.
I was teased by friends. In fact, one so-called friend said, look, I want you to go out with this guy. And this is what I was in hospital, just to see what it's like anyway. I didn't know. He was married. I was on copious amounts of drugs and wasn't meant to have alcohol. Well, he pushed alcohol down me, then took me back to his family batch, and raped me. And then took me back to my parents' place, pushed me out of the car, and Mum and Dad thought I'd taken an overdose, taken me back to hospital where I'd had a stomach pump, and no one had ever known at that time that I'd been raped.
In 1982, Joan left Princess Margaret for the last time, despite doctors telling her that stopping treatment would kill her. She began to build a life for herself, but it wasn't easy.
In 82, it was still pretty bad. I mean, at one time I had graffiti on my fence and it had lesbian on it. And also, if you were going for a job, you just didn't mention that you were gay. I worked part-time the Working Men's Club and kitchen hand, and at the end of our shift we'd meet up for drinks and that, and there'd always be these these jokes about gay people. And I just had to keep my mouth shut. But you see, I couldn't continue on like that because I'm not that sort of person. I don't like being a hypocrite, so I just couldn't stand it. But that's what was going on. Men had to be perceived as being real men, and, people would always presume I was, which really annoyed me, Mrs. They always call me Mrs. Bellingham, and I had to say, I'm Miss Bellingham. There's always this presumption that you were straight.
Yeah. Do you think, because you said you grew up in Christchurch, which is widely known to be one of the more conservative areas of Aotearoa?
Absolutely.
Did you feel that made it even more restrictive for you?
Well, I didn't like it in Christchurch for that reason, and I had a friend who was a neighbour. She was one of the first trannies to have a sex change in New Zealand, and she was working for Carmen in Wellington for a long time.
Carmen Rupe was an openly transgender woman. Her advocacy for rainbow rights made her a celebrated icon for many in the community, including the late Georgina Bayer, who became the first openly transgender MP in 1999.
She was not only out and proud of who she was, but she provided through her establishments a place where we could belong.
Joan spent a lot of time in Wellington and Sydney to get away from what she calls the conservativeness of Christchurch. But she always came back because of family. She remained open about her sexuality, joining in on the growing call for equal rights, including protests for a reform to the homosexual law.
I can remember being thrilled when it was finally passed. Yeah, I can remember a lot of religious groups stood up and really, caused havoc like they did the other day.
Brian Tamaki isn't apologising for members of his church disrupting a rainbow family event at an Auckland library. 30 people, including toddlers, had to barricade themselves in a room when protesters tried to drown out the performance.
I was so disgusted, when I heard it, and I just thought, my God, it feels like we're going back in time. I don't think it's ever going to change. I know a lot have come forward, a lot of people have come forward, but there's also, if you really look into it, there's still a lot of people that oppose anything to do with rainbow.
Do you still think that overall, as a society, that we have made positive steps in this field?
Yes, I do. It's still shocking what's happening, but there's a lot of things where, I mean, we wouldn't have our children or people with children in the marches or anything like that for fear of that child being totally disrespected. We have come a long way. We have, really. A lot of these weird groups that are doing harm, they're in the minority now. They're certainly not in the majority.
For some, accepting that people of the rainbow community deserve equal rights in society requires rejecting a traditional way of thinking that's often been passed down through generations. Joan says this was evident in her family. And while her parents accepted her sexuality, she still couldn't talk about it openly, which felt wrong. Her seeking justice for her treatment at Princess Margaret Hospital was also swept under the rug.
I used to bring up things like, I'm meeting up with such and such to do with the Royal Commission, or I'm going to see the Governor-General. And I'd get no response. I'd get nothing back, no text, no words. But if I said something else about anything else, I'd get a response. So it was pretty difficult. Yeah.
How do you think we break that cycle?
I've been trying. I've really been. That's why I've come out. I've been on Radio New Zealand and on the TV and on the media, and that for the sake of young people and people today. I don't want them to go through what I went through. If it's going to upset my family life, it's going to upset my family life, because I think it's far more important that we stand by each other and help each other. The more we speak out, the more we're showing people that it's normal, it's okay, we're okay. And instead of going into a shell and hiding away and keeping sick, we've got to be out there, we've got to be. And I know it's not easy for some people, but I think the more we do that and the more out there we are, the better it's going to be.
Healthy examples of being gay, being your own sex, being your own gender, make a world of difference growing up and accepting yourself. And I don't think it should just be, on an app, in a nightclub, behind closed curtains where no one can see, because that's not healthy.
That's all for today. Thank you to Josiah Pasakali and Joan Bellingham for sharing their stories. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. This episode was engineered by Alex Harmer and produced by Alexia Russell. I'm Davina Zimmer. Ka kite anō.